Greetings, I'm Quentin Schultze, author of the book You'll Shoot Your Eye Out, Life Lessons from the movie A Christmas Story, written by Gene Shepard. And I thought, it's 2024, the year is quickly slipping away, and I should do something in remembrance of Gene Shepard, who I befriended and also taught storytelling with. And so I thought I would put in a nutshell some of my reflections of what Gene was like, what his work was like, and how those two went together. So 25 years ago, he passed away in 1999. His wife, Lee, passed away the year before, 1998, and she was really, in many respects, his emotional provider. And he did not do well toward the end of his life. He was lonely, kind of a recluse, and then passed away, and of course all of the articles came out about Gene Shepard, and most of them talked about A Christmas Story as his singular achievement. I don't think that's true. I think you have to look at his stories as a whole to make a judgment of Gene Shepard as an artist, as a raconteur, a storyteller. In my judgment, he was an awfully good one, but he was also a very difficult guy to work with in many respects. Gene Shepard's humorous stories were actually parables. Every one of them was a parable with an underlying meaning or lesson. And overall, what I would like to leave you with is the idea that his parables emphasized a rather dismal view of men, along with what we could call a personal fractured life, his life fractured, and then the lives of the people that he wrote about fractured as well. I got to know him while teaching storytelling with him, so I learned about how he told stories and what the meanings of those stories were. He didn't like to talk about that publicly. In fact, he rarely talked about it because he felt if other people understood how he concocted the stories and what he meant in telling those stories, his storytelling would lose its mystery, its wonder. People would no longer look at him as such a great artist, and because they would know how he was doing what he was doing. But those are the kinds of conversations that we had as I got to know him as a person, his own troubled person, and his own storytelling as a way of trying to address his being troubled. That sounds probably strange to you because you think of him as a great comedian, although he's thought of himself as a humorist, as someone who told humorous stories designed to bring us down to earth, the humus, to humble us, to help us see our weaknesses. That's kind of what he did across the board, looking at the world around him and then seeing himself as part of that world in his own brokenness. His most popular work was A Christmas Story, the movie, and he liked it. He liked it a lot. He did not like the final scene with Mom and the old man getting together and reconciling on the sofa. He thought that was too predictable, too sappy, too romantic, and so he didn't like that scene, but he did like the movie overall, and he was glad that the final scene of the movie was the two kids, Ralphie and Randy, in bed with their toys, and Ralphie in particular with his rifle getting off hip shots into the night. I won't say anything more about that in this video, but take a look at some of my other videos. Interesting to think about that today, his movie, A Christmas Story, is seen annually, mostly around Christmas, by about 50 million American adults. And of course, the two channels, TBS and TNT, the Turner channels, that play the movie 24 hours, generate a lot of those numbers, but not all of them. In 2023, that doggone movie sold almost 9 million DVDs. And you can hardly even rent a DVD now, and a lot of people don't even have DVD players. It's amazing. But to think for a minute about that 50 million figure in the audience every year, according to the Pew Research organization, 50 million adults is about what in the United States is the number of people who will attend church on this coming Christmas. the same number as will see his movie around Christmas time. That's just staggering to me. Shepard believed that men have an obsessive quality, obsessive toward women or substitutes for women. And so if males get tired of being romantically inclined toward women, they transfer it over to technologies. And it could be a Red Ryder rifle. It could be a leg lamp, which is the old man's trophy wife in the movie. It could be all kinds of things. It could be a car, let's say, like a 1937 touring Oldsmobile, like the one in the movie A Christmas Story. This is what men do according to Shepard. He believed it was primordial in men that the hormones would rise up in men and cause them to have romantic, obsessive inclinations toward things, women or other things that were these second-class substitutes for women. Again, this is Gene Shepard's worldview as I understood it talking with him. It's not necessarily something that I agree with, but it's a staggeringly interesting worldview that you see at the base of many, many, many of his stories. It's these things that men chase and become excited about. It's a decoder ring. How about that one? Ralphie has to have that decoder ring. Boy, oh boy, he runs to the mailbox and he checks every day to see if that ring is coming in. It's that thing that he can hold and manipulate and come up with the numbers on and get this magic, this connection with these people from afar, little orphan Annie and her crew. And somehow these messages, these secret messages, are just going to be great. And so there's this obsessiveness with men, and then there's the letdown. Things are not quite the way you would expect them to be. They're not quite that great. And so men get disappointed and they have to move on to other things. Or women will break their obsessions, as Mom does with the leg lamp. She breaks that leg lamp because she is breaking the trophy wife, the substitute wife that the old man has with this crazy leg lamp, like the one I have right back here. This major award, this leg lamp, we have to see in a kind of Freudian way. What Gene Shepard liked to do is have symbols in his various stories that kind of symbolize the whole, the part that stands for the whole. And in ancient Greek rhetoric, the term for this is synecdoche. Synecdoche, the part that stands for the whole. And so he would have these symbols, whether it's a rifle or whether it's a leg lamp or whether it's a tie that somebody wears that becomes a noose into the night or whatever it is. And if you focus on the symbol, if you look for the meaning of those symbols, then you begin to understand the whole story that he's telling. Now, what about these sexual, romantic male urgings? What do we do with that stuff in Shepard's storytelling? Well, I pressed him on it. I said, Gene, I don't get it. Are you basically a Freudian? Do you believe that there's a sexual basis for everything that human beings do, and it has to do with kind of repression when they were growing up, or bad relationship with a parent or a father? What's all of this? Well, he was not that complicated or academic in his view of this sexuality that was underneath things. His basic view of that was that somewhere along the way in the genes, men got this sense that they had to prove who they were in front of other men, and they had to do it with things. It could be with a woman that they would show off, like the trophy wife, the leg lamp that he wants to put in the window to turn on the neighbors, or it could be something else, like a car that a male would get and then want to drive around in. And so he believed that somehow there was this historic, primordial-based competitive nature that men had with respect to women. The more I talked with him about this, the more I wondered about his own background. I mean, one day he said to me, You know, Quinn, if you really want to understand what's going on in my stories here, you have to understand what happened to me back there in Hammond, Indiana, you know, where I grew up. I said, well, Gene, come on, man. Tell me, what are you talking about? He said, my old man. Now, note that that's what he uses for father, old man. He doesn't use father, and rarely does the old man refer to his sons by name. There's a broken relationship, at least broken emotionally. It's not necessarily abusive, but it's not close. It's not tight. It's not the kind of relationship where younger men would learn from the older men to avoid the mistakes that the older men had already been through in their lives. So Gene said to me, think about my old man. I was at home one day and he came home after school. He started packing up a suitcase. And as Gene relayed the story to me, his father said to him, Gene, you'll understand when you get older. He said, kid, I'm leaving. He packed up that bag, he took off, and Gene watched him walk down the stairs, the front of the house, out to a convertible. In the convertible already was his old man's secretary, younger, blonde, according to Gene, and the two of them took off, and Gene never saw his father again. I believe that that episode in Gene's life really hurt him, along with the earlier times in his life that his father was simply not around. Womanizing, just plain gone. Not there sometimes overnight, who knows? But his dad was not around. He didn't have the emotional love and support from his father. So Gene lived with that. And I think it gave him a kind of warped view of men and put him in a situation where he always felt competitive toward other men. And he wanted to be the greatest storyteller so he could be a better storyteller than other guys. And he wanted to tell stories about guys who were dumb and did foolish things because of their romantic urgings, because it made him look better to put down other people. I think. It's a psychological explanation that I'm offering here, but it's the only one that I have based on my relationship with Gene. Gene was married 4 times. With his second wife, he had a couple of kids, and his fourth wife, he finally, in some sense, hit the jackpot with, Lee Brown, because she became like his manager, his emotional caretaker. But he had 3 previous marriages that were not good. He had great difficulty with interpersonal relationships, and he could be very argumentative. I mean, he had an idea that he knew the way the world was, the reality of things, and his stories would capture that, and you had to agree with him. He wouldn't necessarily give that impression when he would do his performances or his radio program. He came across as avuncular, personal, likable, like the father or the uncle giving you wise advice that you wanted to listen up on because you knew this was important. Whatever he was going to say was important. But in Gene's mind, he didn't really want to have a family because families tie men down, and he didn't want to be tied down. He wanted to be a free spirit, to go out into the world, to create a career, to be famous, to be legendary, even though he had very low self-esteem. This is interesting. Now, I've known a lot of people in the entertainment business, some of them comedians. What makes them really good comedians is they have low self-esteem, and so they feel like they have to be really good at what they do. And on top of it, they have really grand, great, big egos. And that was Gene. A big ego and low self-esteem. And he lived with that his whole life, and it dogged him. It dogged him in the marriages. It dogged him in friendships. And I don't think he ever came to terms psychologically with all of this. I really don't. I think he went to the grave in '99 without really reconciling with other people that he was estranged from. I often wonder what would have happened if he had gotten his relationships in order and his ego were not so fragile and his self-esteem was stronger. But I don't know that he would be the greatest storyteller if he had it all together. He would be too quote-unquote normal, and believe me, he was not normal in that sense. His fans adored Gene. I mean, when he would go out speaking or sometimes just meet people, like we would go out to a restaurant and he would be talking with the waiter or something, and then he would indicate who he was, and he wrote this film or whatever, and they would be really impressed, and he loved that. He loved being adored from his fans because his fans gave him the acclaim that he needed. And so there are a lot of legendary stories of his fans going out to see him in a performance, and then Gene would invite his fans out for coffee, and he would regale them with stories for hours. Gene did that kind of thing. It fed him. It kept him going, really. It was so important. I think fans don't understand how important their adoration of Gene was for the maintenance of Gene as a great humorist. At the end of the movie, remember, in A Christmas Story, where there's that reconciliation of Mom and Dad on the sofa, and I mentioned earlier that Gene didn't like that because it was too sappy. In a sense, it was too formulaic. Although all of his stories followed certain formulas, you can read about that in the appendix of my book, he didn't like that. He went to the grave feeling that life is broken for human beings, it's especially broken for men, and it's the way it's always going to be. He would say to other people in interviews, or sometimes he would just say it in a conversation, that eventually we die, and death is a defeat. And there is no humor, there's no comedy in that. It's the end. Yet, at the same time, he believed that there was grace. There were these unexpected things, these pleasures in life, walking on the beach, listening to the birds. He loved, and Lee did too, their dogs. A great dog they had, Daphne, and so much fun for them. And he really enjoyed storytelling, and he felt that somewhere behind all of that, there might be a God. I like to tell the story of sitting down with him in a cafe, the two of us to have coffee, and coffee comes, and it was a cold, cold morning, and it's sitting there, ceramic cups, and he picks his up and holds it up and smells it and takes a little sip, and he puts that down, and he says, "Quinn, when you have a good cup of coffee, there must be a God." And he meant it. He could never shake off the possibility that this life in this world, though inexplicable in many ways, was really fantastic. And it was a gift. And that sappy ending to A Christmas Story may in fact be something similar to the end, the far end, the heavenly end, if you will, of life, beyond just the tragedy, the brokenness, the males chasing all of these things and then getting disillusioned with them and going on to the next one. There may just beyond that be something grand, something that you can really taste here on earth, even though you can't with 100% guarantee it. Those are some reflections on Gene Shepard. Quite an interesting guy. Deeply troubled, fantastic storyteller, a dismal view of men in particular, and a guy who struggled his whole life with his low self-esteem and monumental ego. But all of it together, somehow with his powers of observation, made him one of the great storytellers in the United States in the 20th century.